Hi, and welcome to this particular panel on space and communication at the Kalpana Chawla Space Policy Dialogue in 2021. There's been a tremendous amount of changes in the realm of satellite communication that has happened over the last few years, especially with the entrance in the low Earth orbit that have pumped in a massive amount of money with new technologies coming into play that can bring in a lot of the new benefits to areas around the world where people are still unconnected. With that, we have an excellent panel here of three people who come from different backgrounds and different institutions, if you say that. And we're going to hear basically one from Krishna, who is the CTO and the regulatory head for Hughes Communication India, and he comes from a background of commercial space, I guess, and he can address the whole commercial aspect of it. And then we have Neha Chaudhary, who is coming from a legal background, and she can obviously talk a little bit on the regulatory perspective, probably putting into context what is going on in the global context, and then how relevant of this, how can we replicate some of this in the Indian context. And then we have Dr. PK Jain here, who's the Associate Director for Frequency Management and SATCOM Planning at ISRO. And obviously, this is a key function of ISRO to coordinate the use of these frequencies and to plan out how all of these services will be rolled out in India. And I guess with these three different perspectives, we will get an excellent overview of what is happening within India, and from also putting in context to the global context with this. So with that being said, we'll probably start off with Krishna here on what are the current and the future satellite broadcasting broadband services perspective for this, and how do you see this evolving, especially from a global context, and then putting together a perspective for India on all the things that are happening around the global context. So Krishna, I would love to hear from you on this.
Sure. Thanks, Naren. And really thank the organizers, especially Raji, who've had me in this panel for possibly many years. It's good to be back again. I think the first and foremost, I think we've all we've lived in an era where the capacity has been controlled, and there've been a lot of regulatory challenges. But the good news is, as of 2021, the government is really on an overdrive to make a lot of these policy regulations, go easy on them, and go about a very light touch regulation. So that's really changing the landscape from where we are today. Today, it's more supply driven market where the demand is much more, the supply is in a shortfall. So that's where we are today. So what we are going to really leapfrog and possibly in the next year is it's just going to reverse. So there's going to be far more supply than the demand. So obviously, globally, we have seen this. Even before the LEOs are coming up, even though the LEOs, there's so much talk about LEOs today, we still don't have a constellation which is up and running. So in the current context, it's important to talk about the GEO HTS, the high throughput satellites, how they have transformed, how SATCOM delivers broadband and broadcasting services to the masses. So I think we've all known about technologies which are reusable rockets, software-defined payloads, and in-orbit refueling. A lot of those technologies which have never been done in the past have all been done now. In fact, I remember way before 10 to 15 years back, we attempted a payload which had onboard processing of both power and bandwidth, where we could spread the spectrum across different beams and power across different beams. By the time we tested and we put the payload up, we were bought over, and our new owners decided to do something else with that satellite. So it's interesting to see that the same technology today is very much feasible. a lot of satellite companies are using the technology effectively. Today, it's become so well defined. Things like your hopping, frequency hopping, or channelization, or beam hopping, and those kind of technologies have become a lot more proven, and they are able to deliver services. Today, if you have, say, a cruise vessel or out in the sea, there are today services which are delivered even to the extent that they track the cruise vessel across the ocean, and they deliver huge capacities into that cruise vessel. Similarly, on the land, there are a variety of applications that are possible, both commercial and defense. Thanks to some of these newer technologies that are available. I think the future landscape is definitely going to be more exciting because the LEO and MEO technologies are emerging. The MEO has been around some. I think one constellation has been up and running for quite some time, and the LEO constellations possibly from middle of next year, early next year, middle of next year. I think they will all be providing services. So I think it's going to be the most interesting time. One thing to add again is a lot of credible players and a lot of new companies which have come into this foray, and those companies are really I think they are disrupting this industry. Not only they are adding credibility to the industry, but they are disrupting the industry. Names which we have never heard about before. These are not the old boys club, but it is all new age companies which are today manufacturing satellites very very custom to a given application, and at a incredibly low cost. I think that's really interesting to see. So I think with all this, I've always said from a regulatory and a policy perspective, 2021 has been the defining year. But I think all the fruits we are going to see fructify in the next year, which is 2022, when all of this is going to become a reality.
Thank you so much, Krishna. I think that puts a lot of interesting things into context. So, Neha, I think one of the most interesting developments that I've seen now is this formation of InSpace and very aggressive take on policy making again with the SATCOM policy, with the new draft coming into place, and then renewal of the draft and so on. Of course, this is also a debate that is going on in other parts of the world, in the US, in Canada, in Europe, and many other places as well. So, from your perspective, are we on par with most of the governments around the world with respect to these policy making efforts, or is there something more that we can do that allows services to be provided to customers around the country? That would be lovely to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much for that, Narayan, and thank you so much to the organizers for having me here. This is, unlike Krishna, this is my first time speaking at this conference, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So thanks a lot for that. I think that's actually really interesting framing to the question, Narayan, and I think the short answer is that I wouldn't necessarily say that I'd share Krishna's enthusiasm in the sense of that we're taking several steps in the right direction on the policy making front towards having a more liberal and open or unrestricted ecosystem, even regulatory and policy ecosystem, when we think about the SATCOM or space communications sort of ecosystem. But I think that we are there's some distance for us to go there before we sort of reach that. And I think that this is a debate, or this is a conversation that we began to have a few years ago, even with the National Digital Communications Policy, and even before that, when we began to think through very seriously about what are the kind of reforms that we really need to bring about for the sector to really sort of realize its true potential. And I think what we've seen, especially in the past year, which I think year or maybe a couple of years, which I think has been really, really exciting, is that we're seeing attempts at reforms or attempts at liberalization happening on two fronts, right? You have a whole bunch of stuff that the Department of Space is thinking through, stuff that you were talking about, a new space com policy in the works, thinking about thinking through really what is the role of InSpace going to be, what is the role that can we think about questions like having perhaps a single regulator, can we think about single window clearances, a lot of these issues that we've begun to now have conversations about. And at the same time, of course, there's been some action from the Department of Telecommunications itself in liberalizing the telecommunication regime that obviously is a part of the SATCOM ecosystem that we're talking about. Whether it's thinking about questions about what's going to happen with the 28 gigahertz spectrum, how are we going to auction it, how are we going to price it, whether it's this new consultation paper that they have come out with a few days ago about thinking through potentially a new license for ground earth stations as opposed to going through this complicated unified licensing regime again, which is very, very restrictive. So I think a lot of open questions. Definitely, we've seen some reform come through, 100% FDI now allowed in the telecom, automatically allowed in the telecom sector. So we've definitely seen, I think, positive intent. But I would say that there is some way that we have to go before we can actually claim to have a enabling regulatory and policy ecosystem that actually is as exciting as you're making it out to be. So, yeah, I'll pause with that. If you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to take them.
Sure. Probably we'll go to Dr. Jain first, and then do a comeback. So, Dr. Jain, of course, the SATCOM division in ISRO has been the key driver for a lot of the coordination that is needed between DOT and other government institutions as well as the private sector for a long, long time. And today, as Neha said, we do have InSpace coming up and a lot of these changes coming up. So, from your perspective, how do you see this, your directorate, for example, working with InSpace, working with the private players, evolving, given that there are a lot of these policy changes that are happening at both institutional levels as well as the policy level happening now?
Yeah, thanks, Narayan. And first of all, let me thank ORF. So, Narayan, as you rightly said, that now the lot of changes we are seeing of late, which Krishna and Neha also pointed out, especially the government having decided to open up the space sector, which was already open for private, non-government private entities. But now the change is that these non-government private entities would be co-traveler. So this is a certain change in the government approach to promote the industry and to play a major role in the space sector in the country. Now, and of course, the intent also has been demonstrated by formation of the InSpace. And InSpace, Neha was talking about the single window system and all. In fact, the InSpace is a single window system as far as the space communication is concerned, and that is there in the mandate of the InSpace in the Gazette notification also, that it would act as a single window system. So certainly the intent is there. The government has decided that the involvement of the industry for the establishment of the satellite systems, especially, and the establishing the various facility and utilize whatever the ecosystem which has been created by the government for the benefit of the country. And I think this is one we can say that the very big step in that direction. And of course, I can understand the hesitation of Neha, some skepticism on that how would it fructify and how would it really we will be able to achieve the target. But I think this is just beginning, and then we should have patience. The way the things are moving, if you see that the activities which is taking place now, especially even for the revision of the SATCOM policy, which we have been certainly talking for last 2 years. But the momentum it has gathered now after the formation of the InSpace. The public consultation is already over. we had a lot of discussion recently. Also, we had discussion with the industry and the different association, and those things are being addressed. So we'll see certainly the changes, maybe a few months, and then we will be at go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So, Krishna, going back to you, would love to understand what is the size of the opportunity specifically in India that puts into context, foreign direct investment into the country that is possible at the end of the day, because I think that should be one of the key drivers to policymakers to understand that the size of the potential of the market here and to be serviced, that then allows foreign direct investment or even local investment for that matter to take place, that will then create jobs and so on. So do you have any perspective on this?
Yeah, sure. So I think let's look at the market, and for the existing the GSO based satellites and the new non GSO based satellites. I think today the non GSO based satellites are predominantly going to be foreign. So there are companies which are going to put up these constellations, and what has happened with the non GSO is possibly the entry barrier for a lot of small companies to get in has really gone up. So which means we are going to be dependent on some of these constellations to provide services or get services serviced. And at the same time, for the GSO, it's very important that I think these two, in my opinion, are going to be two complementing technologies. So the GSO has a role to play, and the non-GSO has a role to play. It's not one size fits all. So if you now come back to the GSO, I think each satellite, today, we're talking about possibly a high throughput satellite with ground segment, etc., is about at least $700 million. And in addition to that, possibly an establishment in the country, everything. So we're talking about easily $1 billion of investment, that is going to happen. Now, with that, even if we are seeing, 4 or 5 such, satellites go up, and in the new framework, we are easily talking about $4 to $5 billion of investment, and the capacity creation around that, and of course the jobs which are going to be there for servicing those customers who are going to take capacity on those satellites, whether it's consumers, or institutions or whatever. Similarly, on the non-GSO side, so possibly the one right approach which has been taken, and of course we have our own security needs, which has driven that, not more a commercial need, but we've said that we will only permit such constellations as long as they have gateways within the country. Now, as and when these gateways are set up, that's again investment coming in, to set up these gateways within the country. There's a lot of local talent that's going to be hired to run these gateways, run these services, and provide services to the masses. And of course, it's a huge, if you're addressing quite a huge population which is otherwise today only connected by mobile broadband, then we're talking about a huge market size. I think one of the companies has already said that they'll address about 200,000 subscribers in the first 2 years. Of course, the size is a much larger number, but India has a unique problem. I wouldn't call it as a problem; it's more a challenge where our affordability substantially drops. The moment you go under top cities. So that's one. If you see, has been advocating this model of public data office, where which is in the rest of the world is called the Community Wi-Fi Initiative, where satellite will provide a kind of a access point, be an access point, and where subscribers could come to that access point, in and around that access point, use Wi-Fi and get onto the internet. I think somewhere we're also over dependent on the mobile networks today. I think that's why the government has taken a very, very conscious initiative of setting up these Wi-Fi hotspots, so satellite could power these hotspots as well. So that's another big opportunity. The third opportunity is also a lot of these service providers, mobile service providers, as they expand into the tier three areas, definitely they are now going to need backhaul. And one of the new reforms that has happened is towards enabling those backhaul networks via satellite. So that and a combination of the LEO of the non-GSO satellites is a very potent backhaul option that's available to them. Again, a lot will depend on how a lot of these services are going to be priced in the country. For example, today, we are in a tariff structure where today consumer pays possibly a 10 rupee per GB as tariff for data. So the cost of satellite broadband is even with a lot of these constellations, we are talking about 100 to 150 rupees per GB. So it is going to be very challenging for the mobile operators to buy capacity at 100 rupees a GB and sell it at 10 rupees a GB. So very innovative models and very geography dependent pricing will have to come in really to address this gap. So I think from all this, the opportunity is there, which is quite big, but it's all for the industry to really grab it and bring about a lot of innovation, not just in the technology, but also in the way the commercial packaging, etc., to really address this huge market.
Thank you so much, Krishna. I think that is very interesting statistics and perspective. So, Neha, Dr. Jain mentioned that this is an evolving space when it comes to policy making at the end. And let's say you were not completely satisfied with everything that is happening at this point of time. I mean, we can always see that everything is evolving at the end until there's a kind of a stability for everybody to look at as a level playing field. So we've already seen a couple of drafts in that sense of the SATCOM policy coming up. Do you think that there are more things that are not addressed or not addressed in a way that it is perfect for the industry to have a level playing field? And if there is, what are the kind of bottlenecks that you see that still needs to be addressed?
Thanks, Narayan. Look, I agree with the point that Dr. Jain was making earlier, and I think that we have every reason, in fact, to be optimistic because we've seen a concerted effort, starting right from the Prime Minister's office, towards introducing significant reforms in this sector, and the optimist in me wants to believe that this will 100% continue to be the case. But just in terms of some of the open questions that I think we'd like clarity on, right? This is one of the things that we were talking about earlier is this single window clearance system, and I'd be really, really curious and very interested to see how all of this actually gets operationalized and what in particular the role of InSpace will be, because the way things currently stand, you still have to work with the Department of Space and you still have to work with the Department of Telecommunications. Their jurisdictions are sort of overlapping, but at the same time they are distinct, and it's complicated. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's a fairly complex regulatory ecosystem to be able to make sense of, and there isn't a lot of clarity even in terms of do you go to the DOS first, do you go to the DOT first, is like where do you start even before you're beginning to unpack really how all of this is going to play out. So I mean, I think that to me would be headline to just streamline the way really the law functions and really sort of plays out in practice. I think that would sort of be my one big headline item. The second outstanding thing, again, while it's great that we're having all of these conversations on the policy sort of instruments that we're currently seeing, at the end of the day, if I'm putting on my lawyer's hat, this only makes sense if this is going to be crystallized and sort of hard-coded into law. And this is where then questions like the Outstanding Space Activities Bill, which it's been several years now, these are the kind of legislations that we'd really like to see movement on, because you do need an overarching legislation that brings in all of this together such that questions like this then become not questions really, but become sort of part of settled law. I think these would be these would be the big things. There are a couple of, I think, depending on the issue that you were picking up, there would be, I think, scope for perhaps incremental reform. Say, if I were the question that we were talking about earlier, in fact, on foreign participation in this ecosystem. So we've made progress with 100% FDI being allowed in telecom. We have 100% FDI in satellite, but again, that's through the government approval route. You still need, the way the law is currently structured, you still need, if I'm a foreign operator, I still need to set up an Indian entity. I still need to set up an entity in India that's then going to be able to go on and get all of the various authorizations, etc., that are necessary. So I think depending on what is the specific issue or the question that you were dealing with, I think the details of this might change. If you were a startup, then again, like the question of liability, how much insurance can you really expect startups, to be able to get? What is the kind of liability that you're really on the hook for? So depending on who you were, there would be a couple of these more outstanding questions. But I think in terms of headline item, for me, it would still be sort of large-scale structural reforms on the law, really. And I know Krishna wanted to add to this, so yeah.
Yeah, very good points, Neha. I think my 2 cents on this is, a lot of people talk about the single window, and I've said this before. It's not just enough if you do a single window, because behind that single window, if there are 10 different agencies, it serves no purpose, because you're again going to and believe me, the private industry is very, very efficient in chasing 10 people than a government department chasing those 10 people. And that's it's a simple fact, and that's the way it works. So I think the concentrated effort today, I've been party to many discussions, on InSpace and with the Department of Telecom. I think there is a very concentrated effort in reducing the number of steps. That's so all of this. That's why I said 2021 is going to be a defining year. Hopefully, some of this will get announced before the end of the year. So there are task forces that have been formed to reduce the number of steps. So one of the key areas, especially with respect to SATCOM, has been, the biggest all of us have been dealing with one way or the other is spectrum. Right? Neha did talk about it, the 28 gigahertz, and it's not just 28 gigahertz, but it's for any satellite band. It's it is a challenge. So the traditional mindset has been that you assign spectrum to a service provider, be it terrestrial or be it satellite. You kind of paint it with one brush, right? But in the terrestrial context, spectrum assignment means a lot different than in the satellite context. So what we have been really advocating, and this is kind of in the works, is that tomorrow, if so end of the day, if there's a satellite which is getting authorized, so InSpace is also going to look at the frequency of operation or the spectrum associated with it, because internationally, if you really see the satellite in itself, the authorization and the spectrum always go hand in hand. I mean, these are two inseparable things. So it would be good for just one agency to administer both of them rather than this being separate. So then what we can really talk about is, so the Department of Telecom then all they need to do is license the earth stations alone, which can be done through a general authorization, which is done in many of the other geographies. So which means, right, and I think, Dr. Jain will understand this better. We've talked in the past, when a satellite goes up, why can't the entire spectrum of that satellite be authorized once and for all? And you don't have to really then assign spectrum to each and every service provider. You just need to look at certain carrier plans and link budgets and give specific approvals. But those are all more earth station dependent than the satellite dependent. So that is one thing. If it really happens that if you're able to bundle up this satellite authorization itself along with the spectrum, I think that would go a long way, and that is what is in the works. I really hope and pray that that gets through with all the discussions. That would be something to really look forward.
Thank you very much, Krishna. So, Dr. Jain, again, with respect to all of these things that we discussed, do you see these policies that are now being evolving as something India centric, and the solutions coming from within the discourse that is happening within India between policymakers and the industry, or are there any standard best practices that that are from around the world that you see as adoptable in the process? Because of course, many other governments in other parts of the world are looking at let's say creating the level playing field for their industry as well. So, what do you see with respect to this lens?
Yeah, thank you, Narayan, for that question. Uh, yeah, we should always look at the best practices which is happening around you when you decide make any policy for your own country, and it is very logical, which generally everyone does. When it comes to the space system, now we should understand that the every country has a different scenario. It's a different demography, different requirements, and the different technological advancement, the establishment of ecosystem, the heritage, many aspects which would play a major role in deciding the policy. Now you take the case of India, and if you start comparing with, I don't name the country, but a country which is still coming up in the space area. Now, we cannot compare the two policies of the two countries for the SATCOM. While India is looking at having established already well established in the space area, now it is we are looking at to certainly expand our horizon, and then we are looking at much more the advanced way to utilize the space technology, whereas a small country is still yet to utilize the basic minimum requirement of the space technology. And similarly, if you compare with another nation who is already very advanced in the space sector, having the adequate spectrum and the orbital resources and all, then their approach would be totally different. So while we can always adopt the whatever we can, which is relevant for our country, and which we have done also, we have you might have seen the policy, the draft policy, which of course is still in the draft stage. The focus is on the acquisition of the orbital spectrum resources, because we know the importance of it now. India was a late entrant as far as the satellite communication was concerned, and then we really do not have a very large orbital spectrum resources with us as compared to the other early entrants. And then certainly, if you don't have the orbital spectrum resources, then there is no point in thinking of the promoting the space communication within the country. So that is the major thrust. We might have seen the focus on that. Similarly, there were certain the observations by the industry, which again through the experience of last 30-40 years, that the industry had a lot of the observation with respect to the procurement of the capacity, and then the associated issues like the contract in between someone was sitting and all. So all those points which we are trying to address in this particular policy. So certainly we have made the progress, taken the all the observations and the best practices. So this is what I would say as far as this policy is concerned. I would like to tell one or two points, if you permit me, about the previous observations by Krishna. One was that with respect to the previous regime being rather the current regime being the supply driven, and then the lot of demand was there but supply was less. I beg to differ slightly here. Of course, as far as indigenous capacity is concerned, we were probably falling short of the demand, but at the same time the country was not deprived of the capacity, because there was a mechanism to use the capacity. Of course, there would certain procedures were there, but nevertheless, the country was certainly meeting the demand through lease capacity. But of course, now we will see that probably it is further, the things would be further easing out. Now, with respect to the spectrum assignment, which Krishna was talking about. Now, again, if you compare with the current mechanism, where you see the as far as the indigenous capacity is concerned, it is put up by the government. So basically, the usage of that particular spectrum, again, it is between the two departments, Department of Space and Department of Telecom, and of course the whatever the spectrum license or something is there, that is a different aspect. Now, when the new regime, when the private industry and starts making the filing for the orbital slot and then start establishing its own satellite system, now certainly they will continue to use those particular frequencies, and this is what is being assured. Now, there are the Department of Telecommunication has the mandate to deal with the spectrum, be it terrestrial, be it space, or be it. So it's a single body, and we cannot certainly may not be appropriate to bifurcate that also. The spectrum per se itself between the one department of the government and the government of department. Ultimately, the administration, as far as international body is concerned, remains only one. So again, we can always debate, and maybe there could be some more the scope of improvement where we could address specifically some of the issues. But as Krishna rightly said, there is already a task force which is working on, in fact, for last 2 years, but now again it has really gathered the momentum to ease out the most of the processes for providing the licenses to the industry for the individuals. So we will see the changes, and again, this is an experience we have to keep adopting and keep it doing. It doesn't mean that whatever policy, the policy is always a broad framework, and then it should not stop you from taking any decision. We should not tie ourselves if you give so much of details in the policy itself, and then afterwards you bind ourselves. So we should have the policy which is enough flexible, which is a broad guidelines, and afterwards, of course, the detailed procedures and guidelines are always can be brought out by the respective departments in the government, and which can always be liable or for the changes, of course, within the ambit of the policy. So this is what is the intention of the government, basically. Thank you, Narayan.
Thank you very much, sir. That's a very elaborate answer. So, Krishna, there is a question here from one of the audience where they say the ISPA was recently formed, and even the Prime Minister attended the whole ceremony. And there's also SIA that is also working in the same sector. So, what do you see as a role for them in helping the industry? And as a follow-up, I know that we're also running out of time soon, so we can maybe conclude by getting a perspective on where do you see this aspect of SATCOM and broadcasting and broadband for all three of you as a common question evolving in the next 3 to 5 years?
Sure. So I think there are probably 3 or 4 associations today, which are operating, in this space, so. I mean, it's a good thing that there are many voices probably, wanting to say the same thing. As long as they say the same thing, that's the issue. So if there are specific, the industry gets fragmented, and the classic example is 28 gigahertz, which is, what Neha brought out. So the industry was fragmented. I think it's largely, if at all we've lost spectrum, it's largely the industry to blame. Because we didn't have a cohesive voice. And spectrum is a very scarce resource. So we all took an approach that it is, it belongs to the satellite industry, you are taking it away. And the mobile lobby said, it belongs to us, you are taking it away. But I think both those approaches were wrong. And it is possibly, beyond the government, I think we all in the industry also have a collective responsibility to look at how we can share that spectrum better. I think it's not, we all think that, it's end of the day, it's the government which has to decide how to, divide that spectrum between various services. there could be a number of win-win formulas that could have been worked out. It has been worked out in some other geographies that I know of, where services coexist with certain restrictions. Dr. Jain knows very well what I'm talking about. So I think so that's one area where we could improve. So possibly we can work together much more. These associations can work together with the other services, other service associations, and that's a role that they can play much beyond any individual companies. And I think where I see them going forward is also I think there's a huge space to cover. I mean, there's on one side you have the launch, you have the satellite building, you have capacity building, you have services. There's a lot of ancillary services which go into the whole ecosystem. So I think the associations have a much larger role to play. Possibly at some point of time, they all, I'm sure, every business thinks this way, that they all work towards differentiating themselves by picking up an area where which is their core competence, or where their members are more aligned. I think that I'll see that. I think we'll see that happen from these associations as well. They will also kind of try to differentiate themselves, or get into a place where they are their members and themselves are a natural fit, and they will push forward their agenda more in that direction. But definitely they have a tremendous role to play in shaping this. I think the government is quite a bit leaning on these associations to know, or kind of get a feedback as to how these things are shaping up. I think from that perspective, definitely have a lot to play. And I think quickly, I think we have just 5 minutes. So lastly, I think so. Once again, I would like to add a lot more, but just to say that 2022 is going to be a year where a lot of these things will fructify. A lot of these constellations will be up. I think we are going to definitely see satellite, mainstreaming, possibly, in the closer to the end of 2022 or early 2023. We're definitely going to see satellite as a very, very viable, service option available to many businesses, consumers, all of us.
Neha, you want to go next? And
Sure. Thanks. I'll keep it short. Look, I echo the enthusiasm I think that we've all shared throughout this panel, including the point that Krishna was just making. I think 2022 in particular is going to be very exciting to see how all of this shapes up. I think we've particularly on the regulatory and the policy side, 2021 we've seen a lot of these conversations begin to happen. There are a couple of now outstanding issues that we're beginning to see action on, further iterations of the Spacecom policy, everything that the TRI is doing on the telecommunications layer of it. So I'm really excited and curious to see how this all plays out. I think well begun, and would love to see a whole lot more, I think. So I'll stop with that.
thank you. So, Dr. Jain, you have the final word.
Yeah, thank you, Narayan. I would just like to say that as far as broadcasting and the broadband is concerned, the future what we see across the world as well as in India specifically, we are certainly moving towards the high capacity satellite, and we can say that there are LEO MEO constellations are coming up, but at the same time, it is not that only LEO and MEO communications, the constellations are going to drive the capacity requirement or capacity fulfillment here. We have the high throughput satellite, and the high throughput satellite in higher frequency bands are going to be we are going to witness that. And because if you see the big constellations, whatever are coming as far as India is concerned, though they are having the terabytes of the capacity and all, but as far as India is concerned, it gets hardly some 20 to 25 Gbps capacity at the end of the day. Whereas the demand, if you see for today India, it's more than 350 to 400 Gbps, which has to be met along with the other substitute, which is high throughput satellite. So conventional satellite will continue to play a role for the DTH sector. But at the same time, the video distribution for the specific regions, that again will switch over to the high throughput satellites. We will see the higher frequency band, QV band also, apart from Ka band. And as far as the demand is concerned, DTH certainly seeing certain threat, or rather than I should say competition from OTT. But in India, what we generally when we discuss with the various operators and all, still the market is going to continue for some more time. And though the OTT and all will be able to again meet through the rural area through the high throughput satellite, but the conventional satellite are going to play a role. As far as the broadband is concerned, we have immense scope in the rural area where we have still around 50 to 55% penetration. Government scheme through various special purpose vehicle like USOF and all will continue to work, especially with respect to the community Wi-Fi, which Krishna was mentioning. But at the same time, consumer broadband also, we will see that the individual there, again, the rural area especially will have the more focus for the satellite operators. And though the Krishna was trying to tell that he was skeptical whether it will be really embraced or not because of the higher cost, but when you don't have the terrestrial communication going to the rural area, there is the only viable media is only satellite, and it's still around 30% only the consumer broadband is there in the rural area today, and we have a lot of scope for the satellite. So this is what I would like to conclude here. I think the time must be up, and this is what is future which I see in the global as well as the in India. Thank you, Narayan.
Thank you very much, all three of you. I think there are some very interesting insights from the whole thing. And I'd like to thank ORF for enabling this discussion on space communication. So I hope they have the rest of the conference as very productive as this panel was. And hope to see you all in person and have you all on a panel together next year. Thank you.